Let's now cross live to Rajdeep Sardesai for a special interview with Shashi Tharoor.
Joining me now is our newsmaker today, Shashi Tharoor, MP and author. Thank you very much, Mr. Tharoor, for joining us. Let's turn to your statement on Jawaharlal Nehru on his birthday that has created a bit of a controversy, where you said very clearly, if today we have a Chaiwala as Prime Minister, it is because Nehruji made it possible to create the institutional structures through which any Indian can aspire to rise to the highest office in the land. Now, the BJP is interpreting this as Shashi Tharoor demeaning the office of the Prime Minister, almost suggesting Narendra Modi owes his rise to Jawaharlal Nehru.
No, that's absurd. First of all, I'm afraid it wasn't a terribly original comment. Others have made it before. But second and more important, in my book, The Paradoxical Prime Minister, I've expressed my admiration for the fact that Mr. Modi has climbed up from very modest origins to the highest office in the land. My point in describing Nehruji's contributions to Indian democracy is to stress that the creation of institutions, being more important than individuals, is what made it possible for any individual in our country to aspire to rise to the highest office. If we didn't have a democracy such as the one that Nehruji did so much to instill respect for, such a thing would not have been possible. That's really all it is. I didn't think it was a frightfully original thought, because I've certainly seen it being said by others not very long ago. So I think the fuss that's being made is typical, I'm afraid, of the BJP is clutching at straws these days. They have absolutely nothing to say about their mismanagement of the economy for 4.5 years. They have no answers on the Rafale scam. They have not been able to address the astonishing price rise thanks to petrol taxes and taxes on other products. And the result now is that they want to raise non-issues in order to divert the attention of an obliging media. I'm sorry you've chosen to oblige them.
You know, you are saying that this is an attempt to distract from the real issues of the day, but it was you at the launch of your new edition of your Nehru biography who made the comment,
exactly,
which has been used by them. Which has been used by them to suggest that Shashi Tharoor seems to believe that India owes its democratic institutions only to Jawaharlal Nehru. Now, do you want to clarify that? Do you want to tell us, I mean, is it fair to suggest that Nehru alone among all the tall leaders of that time was solely responsible for democratic institutions in this country? Is that not giving too much importance just to an individual?
Not really, given that that individual was Prime Minister for 17 years, that Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated in January of 48 and Sardar Patel passed away in December 1950. And Nehru enjoyed an authority that was truly unparalleled in our country. There was no leader of any comparable stature. So had Nehru been so minded, he could have easily done what Nkrumah was to do in Ghana, what Kaunda did in Zambia, what Nyerere did in Tanzania. That is, the great independence era heroes of the anti-colonial struggle, who said we can't run our newly independent countries and direct development and preserve national unity without turning into authoritarian dictators. Nehru never succumbed to that temptation. He went out of his way instead to demonstrate his respect for the structures of democracy, to instill respect for freedoms, to show respect for the judiciary, to give Parliament, with a tiny opposition, importance out of all proportion to the strength of the opposition, and to insist that his cabinet and his officials did the same thing. He went out of his way to instill the habits and practices of respect for democracy in those 17 years of prime ministership, which laid the foundations for what followed. I'm not saying that everything that has happened since his death can be attributed to him, but I am saying that the platforms he laid made these things possible. But imagine if we had gone in a different direction, as so many other developing countries did, and which Nehru could have taken the country on because it was relatively simple for him to do so. If he didn't have a democratic mindset, we wouldn't have the institutions that today a man of humble origins has been able to rise up within. That's the point I was making, and everybody who's heard the entire speech heard it in that context. Nobody raised an eyebrow because it was merely an example. But when you take one sentence out of context and beat on about it, it shows clearly that you, by which I mean the BJP, have an agenda, and the agenda is a simple one of distraction.
But as you've seen that in the past, whenever you use this, whenever your party men have used the reference of Mr. Modi as Chaiwala, it is interpreted as the Congress's form of elitism. and that this is the old Nehruvian order in a way striking at the new order, that Narendra Modi represents a new order, but the Congress cannot reconcile itself to this new order, so still harks back to the Nehrus and the Gandhis, as if independent India owes entirely its democratic foundations to one family. That's where this issue becomes, in a sense, political and controversial.
Listen, the point is very, very clear that there was a context in which I spoke. Secondly, it's Mr. Modi himself who has reminded people of his humble origins. We can find countless speeches and statements in which he's talked about the fact that he sold tea at a railway station. He's talked about the fact that he is the first OBC Prime Minister of India. He has highlighted the fact that a lot of what he has done has been done through his own hard work and achievement. I have actually, as somebody whose own family has had to work hard to get where it's got, I have respected that hard work and I've expressed admiration for it. To my mind, there is nothing wrong in saying that a person like that can only rise in a democracy where everyone gets free opportunities. The truth is that in a system of a dictatorship, there would have been enough ways to ensure the perpetuation of a narrow cabal in power. India as a democracy, thanks to the foundations, the habits, the attitudes instilled by our first Prime Minister for 17 years, has instead been a country where democracy has deepened with each passing year and with each passing election. After all, Mr. Modi is not the first non-Congress Prime Minister of India. We have had elections and transfers of power many times, and Mr. Modi therefore stands on the shoulders of giants. I don't think there is anything wrong in pointing that out. It does not demean the office of Prime Minister. It does not demean Mr. Narendra Modi.
Let me ask you though, Mr. Tharoor, both as an author, MP, historian, to then put this in context, because while you may be right in giving a large share of credit to Mr. Nehru for the fact that in 1950s we ensured one person, one vote, democratic elections, the democratic spirit, there will be those who will say this cannot be a 129th birth anniversary cannot be an occasion for a hagiography of Nehru. You need to assess him, his mistakes, his errors of judgment, along with his achievements. Would you agree that the Congress also needs to move out of a sort of obsession with Nehru? Look at the way this entire Nehru memorial debate is playing out. It is almost as if there is a sense, and Sonia Gandhi reflected it, that you fear that the BJP is trying to usurp Nehru or denigrate him. Do you believe that it's time for a more dispassionate analysis of Nehru, his contribution, his achievements and his failings? Or do you believe that the BJP, as the Congress president or former Congress president accused them of, is deliberately trying to denigrate Nehru's memory?
Of course they are. I mean, I think you have no shortage of examples to suggest that the BJP, and social media is a very good place to check that if you like, consistently disparages and denigrates Nehru, attacks everything he has done, highlights his faults and failures, sometimes real, sometimes imagined, but never gives him credit for any of the things that subsequently they are now standing on. I mentioned, for example, in my speech, that if we rightly take pride in the mission of Mangalyaan, the first Mars orbiter to successfully circle that planet on a first attempt, we have to ask who created India's space program, even in the teeth of opposition. Who made us a world leader in satellite and space technology? It was the Prime Minister who had the vision to create ISRO, even at a time when the country was reeling with over 80% of its population under the poverty line. When we talk about the achievements of Indian scientists in Silicon Valley, and Mr. Modi rightly says we've gone from charming the snake to clicking the mouse, who did that? Who created the IITs?
Should we also not recognize his failings?
And insisted that technological and
sure,
scientific
but should we not also recognize his failings? Is the Congress party also ready to recognize the failings? Whether it is socialism, which seemed to fail in terms of what its objectives were, and subsequently the fact that we didn't rise above the poverty, not enough Indians rose above the poverty line in those years, China, some would say Kashmir. Should we be looking more dispassionately at Nehru, or is there a temptation, particularly if you're a congressman, to treat him as some kind of a modern day deity, which he perhaps himself didn't want?
he wouldn't want it, and I've, in my book, I think, looked at him very whole with all the mistakes and flaws also mentioned. But I don't come to your birthday party and make a speech saying Rajdeep is a great guy, but look at all his flaws. This is the celebration of the birthday of Nehru. You say the things about him that you value and respect. The criticisms are there. There are other occasions to express them. I have certainly had a record of being very outspoken and very, very frank and honest about all the things in which I did, in fact, have my disagreements with Nehruji's conduct or choices or policies. The fact is, this was not the occasion to express them. It's silly on a man's birthday to focus on his mistakes when you're there to actually remind people of the enormous legacy that he left this country. Okay. What India is today in enormous ways was actually shaped by this one man, by his vision, by his intellect, by his erudition, by his commitments and principles. And today some of those things have evolved. Mrs. Gandhi in her speech talked about how, for example, the initial stages of socialism were supplanted by liberalization, also brought about by the Congress. That doesn't mean we repudiate Nehru. We say what he did may have been the right thing at that time, but the world has moved on, and he, as a man of great intelligence who would have adapted to change, would want the Congress party to adapt to change. And the same applies, for example, to the nature of non-alignment, that there are no longer two superpowers not to be aligned between. So we now interpret non-alignment very differently as one of standing autonomously and making our own decisions on the world stage. That's the way we believe Nehru would have wanted us to honor that conviction. But these are all things that we can look at dispassionately as well as with commitment. But anybody extolling somebody on his birthday is not going to sit around pointing out the flaws unless he's as churlish as some of the BJP spokesmen clearly are.
Shashi Tharoor, as always, a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for joining me on Nehru's legacy. Appreciate your joining me.
Good talking to you, Rajdeep.
Thanks for watching the video. For more such news and updates, please like, share and subscribe to India Today. Also check out our other great videos from our channel. We know you will love to.